Okay, so now I want to transition to a discussion of substitution and elimination reactions of alcohols. First starting with substitution, and we'll begin by pondering this question of what happens when you add a nucleophile to an alcohol. And you should be thinking, well, that won't work because an alcohol is a nucleophile itself. Alcohols are nucleophilic, they are weakly basic, and they are weakly acidic, with pKa's between 15 and 20. So nothing happens if you mix two nucleophiles together. We need to do something about this alcohol's reactivity. We need to make it more electrophilic, and then the reaction will be successful. So here's the plan. Activate the alcohol. If you start with an alcohol that can be primary, secondary, or tertiary, we will see different examples. You add some activating reagent that has an electrophilic end and a leaving group. This electrophilic end could be a proton in the case of a strong acid. It could be other electrophiles like phosphorus. But the alcohol will in some step attack that electrophile, usually first.